Hello guys, Panzermice36 here. Today's video is going to be a quick review of Panda Plastics Sherman tracks. I ordered a few sets of these recently. Only one of them's actually for me, but I'm going to take a look in the box of the other sets as well, and I'm going to give you guys a quick overview of what these tracks are like. Now these are Panda Plastics. This is the company that makes them. They're in the United States. As far as I can tell, they don't really distribute them out. You just order them from Panda Plastics and they'll ship them out. I live in Canada, and the shipping price was still fairly reasonable, especially when you buy a few sets at once. And the best part is that they cost about 20 bucks per set, which is roughly half the price of any of the metal tracks that you might want to get for Sherman. So I've got three sets here. I've got the Canadian dry pin tracks, which come in a fancy box. And then I've got T48s and T49s, and those two come in these plastic sleeves, which is a little more simple, but it still does the job. And as you can see, you basically have two sprues a series of times. You've got the end connectors and the actual track pads in the middle. This is the T48s, which are the rubber chevron type. I also have the T49s, which are the same. I've already started working on them, so they're not in the bag anymore, but they're the same setup. You just have a different series of Centerpiece tracks. Essentially, you have the same end connectors. Canadian dry pin tracks come in a fancy box because there's a little bit more to them. This set was, I think, $27, so a little bit more. Probably because they give you some resin drive sprockets, because if you're doing a CDP track, you might not have this in the kit. If you do, well, they might still be good. As you can see for these are a little bit different because they're a different style of track. I mean, they almost look like Panzer III tracks if you look at them from this end, right? But these are simple one-piece tracks, again on sprues, but the cleanup looks pretty easy. And these actually look like they are clickable. I'm not sure if it comes through on camera, but there are basically little pins and pinholes. As you can see, there's an indentation there on the end of the narrow end of the track link. And if you look inside up there, you can see there's also a pin. So presumably these can fit together and they should articulate. Now I imagine that they are quite fragile. Mini Art, T34 and similar tracks use the same method, and they have a bit of a history of, sometimes they'll break because they're a little fragile when you're popping them together. I can't really talk about these, and this set isn't for me, so I don't want to really mess with it too much. But in the worst case, you just basically have individual plastic tracks which you just glue together and wrap around the vehicle, and then you take them off as one big assembly, like I do with my Magic tracks, like this. So you take them off for painting and then you put them back on. But most of their sets are more like this type, where you have the two sprues, where you've got the end connectors and the centerpiece track pads. So taking a quick look at the detail, let's first look at the centerpieces here. As you can see, they are molded 6 on a little sprue here, and you've got the two attachment points on either end. It's a little bit tricky to get in and sand the attachment point on this end where the thicker bar is, just because of the shape of the track. It's curved, then it meets up underneath that little bar. So I had to use a little bit of my hobby knife to scrape it a little bit and then file the rest of it. You can't just file it entirely. And also there's a bit of flash kind of between the pins on the edges, but that's just a quick swipe of the hobby blade as well. We'll look at this when I put a few together. Next up we have the end connector sprue, which has about 12 on it, which is roughly the same amount that you need to put together 6 tracks. And I have noticed a few of these have been not exactly mismolded, but occasionally they are, like you can probably see maybe this one right here. This guy right here, if you look at it, you can kind of see almost like a crack or almost like a short shot just at the end there around where the hole is. And also you can see this guy here has got a little bit of flash, almost like plugging up the holes. That happens sometimes, but most of these are alright, and you can just easily pop out those holes with the hobby blade. As for this one here that's short shot, I've just been tossing them because you get a bunch of extras. The kit has at least 180 track links, which is equivalent to 90 per side, And a Sherman will only need 79 per side, unless it's an M4A4, in which it will need 83 per side. So you're going to have about 20 extra track links, or about 40 extra of these guys. So if you have a couple of ones that are mismolded, it's not exactly a big deal. I just cut them off the sprue. We'll do the little bit of cleanup on these, and then we'll do the same on the end connectors. So on this end of the track link, I just can sand it really easily with my metal file, no big deal. But on the other side, because of the way that plate there sticks out, you can't really get your file in there, especially because there's almost like these little horns on the end there as well. So what I do here is I just use my hobby blade, and I can scrape off most of the sprue gate. And then I clean up the rest of my file. In addition, there is a little bit of flash / seam line between those two pins, but keep in mind most of it's covered by the end connectors, as you can see. So I really just do a quick scrape between those two pins, and that's enough. So like any plastic track assembly, this takes a little while, but it's not really any worse than like kit magic tracks or anything like that. There's always a little bit of cleanup because of how tracks are molded. You're either going to have sprue gates like this, or you're going to have pin marks because they're Dragon Magic tracks. And either way, you do a little bit of sanding. But it's like a couple hours. It's not that bad. You sit down, listen to a podcast or whatever. So with the end connectors, if there's any flash in the little holes here, I just clean that up now when they're on the sprue, because it's a lot easier when they're on the sprue, because you have an easier time holding them together. And then it's just a basic trim and sanding. And then these end connectors simply friction fit onto the ends of the tracks. And the result is completely workable. You don't need any glue. So you can, assemble your full length of 79 or 83 tracks and then wrap it around the model, and then you could pull it off later for painting. Now these aren't heavy enough to have their own sag or whatever, but you don't really want any on a Sherman anyways. But they're very, very rigid. They're not going to fall apart on you. Pretty good. Alright, now for some conclusions. Now I didn't buy this track set to put it on the running gear of the vehicle. Instead, I'm building an M10 that has a lot of track armor on it based off a reference photo. So I needed an entire separate set of tracks just to go on the hull as armor. And that's why I bought these tracks, because since they're plastic, they are a lot easier to glue onto the vehicle. They don't weigh a ton, and it will be much easier to paint them because I can do this. I can have them as these big sheets that I can glue entirely together and glue in place. So it'll be a lot easier to paint the tracks. If it was a bunch of individual runs of tracks that I have to take all apart and weather individually and put back on, it'll be a lot more fiddly. And I'm also worried that they would break off very easily as well. These plastic tracks will glue on very well to the plastic hull. So I make all these assemblies and I could just glue them on later when I've painted them. It'll be a lot more convenient. Now, for the actual running gear itself, I did buy a set of metal tracks, Master Club. I haven't tried Master Club Sherman tracks yet. And personally, I probably will continue to use metal tracks because that's more my style. But I do like these tracks. The fact that they're less than half the price of these is definitely a benefit. But I just think that they're maybe a little bit too much work for my workflow. I don't mind individual link tracks, but when you start getting into multiple parts per each link, like you have here, basically 3 parts per track, it starts to take a little bit of time, and I don't have a super huge amount of time for modeling, so I like to, if I have to spend a little bit of more money for some convenience, I'm okay with that. But other people out there don't like metal tracks, they don't like painting them, they prefer to have plastic tracks, and those people I'm sure will love these sets, and I'm probably going to buy them again in the future, maybe for track armor. And they also produce track sets that aren't available in metal. For example, they have a set of skeleton tracks, which are what these Sherman tracks look like if they've been burned out and the rubbers come off. You basically have like this metal skeleton inside. So in that case, absolutely you should go with these because they look great, and it's really your only option, right? There's also some other benefits, such as the fact that they kind of molded like wear and damage into the rubber pads, which you often see in photos when my Master Club T38 tracks are just like pristine. So if I want to damage them, I have to do it myself. And of course, you can also do this style of track as well if this is how you prefer to paint them. Using these plastic tracks, you can't do this with metal because it's just going to be a nightmare. So in the end, these tracks are highly recommended. Like I said, they're about 20 bucks a set, so they're a great price. My recommendation is I think they're good, but it depends on your style of track. Like I said, if you like plastic tracks, you'll love these. If you don't like a lot of work, these might be a little bit too much for you, in which case metal tracks, while more expensive, might be more attractive. For track armor, these sets are perfect, I think. And if I ever do another tank in the future with a lot of track armor, I will definitely go with these again. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this review and assembly tutorial. As always, I will see you guys next time. Goodbye, stay safe, and happy modeling.